Hi YouTube, my name's Ben. This is if you see my video where I talk about the cancer that I had in my experience, you'll notice kind of a familiar background. I thought I would just see the thing about that story is it's great, but it's not the whole thing because I still had my hair, it was like at the very beginning of chemo. So this is going to be my whole story. But from the very beginning to the very end, I'm going to talk a little bit more about stuff even before the events of that other video, and I'm going to talk about everything that happened after, which obviously hadn't happened yet in that other video. This is going to be everything, and it's very unfortunate for me to say, but unfortunately, right now, about 4 years later, there's a chance from my symptoms that I'm having that I do have cancer again 4 years later, or I have some neurological problem because I'm getting symptoms like numbness in my muscles, which sucks. But I want to tell this story now because if I do get diagnosed again with some other thing, I think that could kind of mess with my ability to connect emotionally to this first thing that happened. So before something like that happens, I'm gonna tell the whole story from the beginning. A little further before the events of the last video, and obviously, I already said this, but obviously after the events of the last video too. So here we go. So my whole life, I would get bad nosebleeds, right? I always thought it was just a genetic thing because my father used to get them a lot, and also I have a deviated septum. So throughout 2014, I started getting them very frequently and very heavy. And in February of 2015, when I would come back from doing Uber, my legs would start to itch. And at first, it was just a little annoying, but then every night at night, my legs would itch, and the itch would start to get very intense, spreading from my legs to my feet to my stomach to my back. And by the end of March, it was over my whole body, and it was so bad that it would affect my sleep. I started buying Benadryl and taking large quantities of it so I could sleep. I couldn't sleep without it. The itch was so bad. I also noticed the itch got worse when I drank anything cold or with ice. So I started to limit these drinks. Very weird stuff. My doctor said that I could have scabies, which is an insect that burrows under the skin and causes intense itching. So he gave me some cream and I applied it all over my body at night to kill the scabies, and it didn't work. And I eventually tried 4 different times at night to get rid of the scabies. I also started to take baths with borax in them, as that is another way apparently to get rid of scabies. I also started to develop a light cough and eventually a constant wheeze. Over the course of the next few months, I saw 5 different specialists, an allergist, a medicinal doctor, and 3 dermatologists. The allergist gave me an inhaler, which worked a little for the cough, but did nothing for the itching. The medicinal doctor told me to go jump in the ocean, which actually, solved the whole problem, and that's the end of the story. One of the dermatologists told me to use Curel, and the other 2 said I was likely just allergic to something like cockroaches and to do my best to clean my apartment. And I did have a roach problem at the time, living in a really crappy, cheap place in LA. During this whole time, from April to October 2015, the itching was starting to feel like torture. It was so bad, I couldn't sleep except for a couple hours a night. And when you're sleep deprived on this level, honestly, watch Fight Club. It's very similar. Life, it's a constant nightmare. Everything becomes a blur of desperation, where your sole purpose in life is to do something so you can find a way to sleep at night. And when you're, and how do I, and then it's like you ask yourself questions like, am I allergic to something? Like my contacts. Okay, take them out to see if that works. Is it scabies? Okay, do a borax bath again and clean the apartment better than I did last time. Okay, did that work? No, maybe I just need to get out of my apartment. Okay, go to a friend's house in Woodland Hills. Did that work? No. Okay, go to a cheap hotel in Los Angeles like the Good Night Inn in Calabasas. Did that work? No. Fortunately, at the time, I had a girlfriend who was helping with the issue, so, she was helping to do things like clean the apartment, and I didn't feel completely alone with it. But the itching was driving me fucking crazy. It was over my whole body at this point. I was getting scars from how much I was itching. I couldn't stop. Nobody knew what the hell was going on with me. No, nobody knew. I just got talked down to by everyone. And meanwhile, every day was just, please let me find some solution to this horrible itching so I can sleep one goddamn night. Ugh, it was so bad. It was so bad. Um, this is when the dermatologists were telling me, like, whenever they told me to put Curel on it, I wanted to strangle them. I mean, they didn't understand the severity of the itch I was feeling. And honestly, likely, if you've never felt this, you won't either. I mean, okay, to describe it, how do I describe it? Okay. It's not just like a ton of mosquito bites or poison ivy, something like that most people have experienced at some point. It is a deep, deep sensation in the body and almost painful. And all I could ever think about was scratching. And then it also then started to feel like an electric shock feeling under the skin. That's how intense the itching was. I felt like I was being electrocuted. And on top of this, no doctor was helping, and everyone I talked to, except my girlfriend, just thought I was having an allergic reaction to something, and I was exaggerating my symptoms, and this itching. Okay, I'm going to explain it better. Imagine the worst poison ivy you've ever had, multiply it by 1,000, add the sensation of being electrocuted and 1,000 bees stinging you under your skin, not to creep people out, but that's how I felt for like 6 months straight. 6 months. Just insane. No doctor was helping. I talked to about it. And it was hell. And it was really 8 months if you include the time the symptoms were starting to happen. And then 6 months of sleeping 2 hours max every night. And everyone I talked to not taking me seriously, saying I was having allergies, just thinking I'm a hypochondriac. And by this point, my legs were so scabbed that it looked like they'd gone through a meat grinder. It was, I don't know, it was the worst ever of my life, unfortunately, except for maybe the last few weeks, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, in September, I decided that the itching, it had to do with the apartment that I was living. And yes, I have written this down. I'm going back and forth from just memory to having written this stuff down because I want to get I want to say every detail, and I'm not going to be able to do that if I haven't written something down. So we thought it was about the apartment, and we were so desperate. I was so desperate, and so was my girlfriend to get away from the itching. And I couldn't afford to find a place first, so me and my girlfriend moved out, and we started to stay in Airbnbs. And I noticed that besides drinking water, staying in rooms with rugs or carpeting made the itching worse as well. So we looked for places with wood floors, and one of the places we stayed, we did a scabies cream treatment, as we thought that the fact that my girlfriend hadn't done a treatment, plus the fact that we've been staying in my old apartment could have made the scabies not go away. I mean, if you look up scabies right now online, like pause this and go do that, you'll see there's like tons of horror stories of people struggling to get rid of scabies, and the issue always came back to not cleaning their living area well enough. And the stories they talk about scabies were as really awful as what I was going through at the time. I mean, scabies are awful. It drives people crazy, because they're probably also not sleeping, and that's how it's really bad. So we did this last scabies treatment in a random Airbnb house in the bed, but we were desperate, and I feel really bad that we just did that in a random person's house, but it's fucked up. But you have no idea how awful it is to have an experience like this itching every night and the sleep deprivation. I was thinking the rest of my life it's going to be like this at night. Nobody knew what was going on. I was thinking this is just how my life, when I'm 40, 50, 60, it's going to be like this nightmare where you can't sleep. And I was just like, oh my God. So we stayed in 5 different places all over LA. Again, the itching wasn't stopping. I was also coughing a little bit more, but I thought it was, unrelated or allergies or something. Finally, we found an affordable new apartment in Hollywood, but the floor was carpeted, so we decided to take the mattress and sleep in the kitchen. But again, this did not work, but it was pretty weird and funny. And so we're at our wits' end, and we finally decided on the ultimate way we're going to get rid of what we were convinced were just really stubborn and treatment-resistant scabies. And again, if you look online, like I said before, you're going to see people with stories like this just about scabies, right? And how they had to get the industrial cleaning products to get rid of them. And that's what we did. We spent hundreds of dollars on industrial cleaning supplies and products. And we're gonna scrub down the apartment perfectly, and the way that they clean in hospitals, the way that they scrub for radiation after like a nuclear disaster, something like that, right? So with the apartment cleaned as perfectly as you can possibly clean an apartment, we're gonna use the scabies cream. And this is about the 5th time I'd asked for the scabies prescription from my doctor. Now, by this point, I was starting to have the occasional night sweats where I would wake up and the sheets would be drenched in sweat, and I was simultaneously freezing cold. So the night that changed my life happened on October 27th, 2015. My girlfriend and myself went to this really bad Steve Jobs movie. Remember that? Ugh. Anyway, during the movie, which is not a good movie, the itching reached a point that it hadn't reached before, and I felt like it was so bad that I was about to pass out just from how intense the itching felt. It's insane. So something in me said it's time to go to the ER, and in retrospect, maybe it's good that the movie was so bad, because if it wasn't, maybe I would have stayed. So we left the theater and we tried to figure out what hospital to go to. We settled on Kaiser, but then we actually had a huge argument because my girlfriend thought it would be much better to go to the more expensive but likely better Cedars-Sinai, and we decided on Cedars, and ultimately I was grateful that was the hospital we'd chosen. So I entered the ER there at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles in a wave of embarrassment. I'm going, great. I'm going to the ER because my skin itches. Yay! And here I am with itch. Other people have gunshot wounds, and it's like, wow, this is embarrassing. Now, at this point, everything started to happen really quickly in my mind. They asked me for my symptoms. I told them my skin itches. I showed them my scars, which likely made a bigger impression than just saying my skin itched. I told them about how long it had been happening, about how I couldn't sleep. I didn't even tell them about the cough and the wheeze that I had, as to me, those symptoms were miles less severe. So my life was saved by the nurse who heard me cough and ordered a chest x-ray based on that. I hadn't even said that was a symptom, but this genius, absolute genius nurse heard it and ordered the x-ray. And months later, I would go back to Cedars, and I went to the medical records, probably been trying to find the name of the nurse who'd saved my life so I could thank her personally and give her like a gift of some kind, only to find that they only kept records of the doctor on staff. And I still feel really bad. If you're the nurse and you see this, reach out to me. My email, or just respond here under this video. I still want to thank you in person. I owe you my life. So, 10 minutes after that x-ray, the doctor came in, not a people person, some doctors can be, and said this: you have a large mass in your chest. It's likely lymphoma. I mean, it's like, what do you, like? And then he left. And I had to look on my iPhone to see that lymphoma was cancer. Yeah, so obviously this is like, this moment in the room with this doctor is going to be, burned into my brain forever. But surprisingly, the first emotion that went through my head was relief. I mean, finally I had found the answer to my itching. Finally there's an answer, and finally I know that the itching won't go on forever. So then I further looked up lymphoma on my phone, and I felt more practical relief after seeing that depending on what type of lymphoma I had and my demographic, I had like a 90% plus chance of recovery if what I had was something called Hodgkin's lymphoma. and a 60% chance of recovery if it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the 60% was a terrifyingly low number, but at least it wasn't one of the more deadly cancers like lung cancer or pancreatic cancer, which is what I think killed Steve Jobs. Going back to that, that kills most people it infects. So the next few days are blurry. I was swimming in the relief that the itching was going to stop relatively soon. To me, that was all that would matter. And it's like, yes, I have cancer. Yes, I'm 28, I have cancer. But thank God the itching was coming to an end. Thank God. A full night's sleep would likely be in my somewhat immediate future. So I was then wheeled from the ER up to the main hospital, and the next item on the agenda was being scheduled for a kind of a surgery called a bronchoscopy, where they go through the area above your collarbone with a miniature camera to take pictures of the mass and retrieve a small piece of it, a biopsy. And then from this, that's how they determine the exact type of lymphoma that I had, and that's how they then determine how they're gonna treat it, because every type is treated differently. So, about lymphoma. Lymphoma is a blood cancer. It is one of two blood cancers, the other being leukemia. The difference between the two is that leukemia affects the blood directly, and lymphoma affects the lymphocytes of the white blood cells. I just feel really weird. I got a really weird emotion going on right now. That's strange. That's weird. I honestly, I just felt this feeling of like, why should I have to? I'm sorry, viewers. I just want to be honest. I got this kind of angry emotion, but that I don't even like. I don't really even feel this. Like I don't feel this, but it went through my mind, and it was that. Like, why should I have to keep explaining this story over again? I don't know. I don't know where that came from. But it's important because it's almost like I feel somewhat hostile to people who are going to watch this. Like, which I don't. I want to tell this story, but wow, why did I think that? You know, I have kind of OCD, so sometimes, I do think thoughts like that I don't really feel, just so that I then feel like morally guilty that I've done something to you or someone. You understand? Like, just because I thought that it's OCD. It's so that I now feel like I'm insulting my audience. Because I swear to God, I don't feel like I don't. That's not how I feel. Like, why should I have to tell this again? Like, I really don't feel this. I want to tell it again. But that's what OCD does, you know. It gives you these thoughts, and then I feel like I've done something really wrong and morally guilty to my audience, and or just to a person. It's not just that's my actual anger talking, and that's really important for you to know, because obviously the last thing I'd want to do would be to insult people watching this. Jesus Christ, OCD sucks. I think thoughts a lot of the time about like murder, but it just to make me feel guilty. It's just OCD is fucking crazy. But that's a whole different issue. Anyway, we got kind of derailed. I'm going back. I had to be honest about that because it was something about the people even watching this, so I have to be honest with you. I don't want to. Anyway, you understand. I'm gonna go back to the story now about the cancer. So, I was wheeled from the ER to the main hospital. He said this. So yeah, right. So lymphoma, the blood cancers, right? Lymphoma and leukemia, right? Leukemia affects the blood directly. Lymphoma affects the lymphocytes of the white blood cells. Now, lymphocytes are part of the body's immune system, and they serve the body almost like a recycling plant where they flush the bad out of the body. They're one of the most helpful parts of the human body. And that is, except, right, when the lymphocyte cells, they start multiplying endlessly and they form tumors it's called the mediastinum, the area of like in between your lungs, in your chest. And yeah, and that's it, tumors with an S. I had two large tumors, one on top of each other, like that were like literally that big in my chest cavity. I have this x-ray still. It's just like the most horrible horror story ever. Like, Yeah, it's just it's so fucked up. And then this happened to me in like my late 20s. I mean, I think people tell me I'm bitter at times, but it's like it's not just from nowhere, right? I mean, this experience was the worst of the worst, the absolute worst of the worst. So, I can't even like talk sometimes. It's so bad. Okay, so back to the symptoms lymphoma causes. They're odd, right? So the most common ones were the cough and the wheeze that I had, and the night sweats, which I'd recently only started having. Right, skin itching is a minor symptom, right? Some people get it and some people don't. Now, surprisingly, even the people who do get skin itching as a symptom, they don't tend to have it nearly on the same level that I did. It's a minor symptom for a reason. Most people, they don't get the endless sleepless nights for months and months, and the severe intensity with the electric shock sensations and the torn up legs and feet from scratching. Most people with lymphoma get another symptom, which I never had, which are enlarged lymph nodes. They get these like lumps on their neck and in their groin area. And this time period, it feels so strange to me. From the doctor leaving the room to my girlfriend's fear, and then both of us feeling stunned, to calling my family and telling my mother, telling me that she was booking a plane ticket to LA right away, and then the nurse giving me my first of probably over 100 IVs I'd have put in me in the next several years, to everyone around me trying to stay calm, to eating some pizza that someone had been generous enough to leave the hospital to get for me so I wouldn't be further tortured from eating, the terrible hospital food. And, I had cancer, and I was 28, and I had cancer, and it's just like, what the fuck? What the fuck? So I tried to educate myself as much as possible about lymphoma. I found out that Hodgkin's lymphoma, the type that has over a 90% treatment success rate, is actually somewhat common in young adults like myself. So that was the type that I was keeping my fingers crossed for. I spoke to one of my mother's friends on the phone who had Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was around at my age, and about how smoothly his treatment had gone. So I felt better, but nothing was feeling as good to me as the thought of the itching just stopping. Like, ugh, I wouldn't wish that itching on my worst enemy. So the night before this thing with the procedure with the camera taking a piece of it, the bronchoscopy, I was nervous. So I don't like the idea of general anesthesia. It creeps me out. I'd had it once before when I got all four of my wisdom teeth removed at once, and it's disturbing because they tell you to count back from 10 to 1, and you're asleep by the time you get to 6, and then you're waking up the second after as if no time had passed. It's creepy. It's probably the closest thing to death, you can experience, right? So I fasted the night before. I was wheeled down to the pre-op. The doctor came over to me. He's a pretty jovial guy. Actually, he kind of had like a bro vibe. He's like, "Hey, Benjamin, how are you? My name is," I don't remember his name, but I want you to know we do this procedure all the time, man. Everything's going to be fine. That's like the Bill and Ted's of surgeons or something. Yeah, and I pictured this like super cool like bro doctor driving down Sunset in his top down Mercedes with the models around him, but he's like a doctor. It's like only in LA. So they wheeled me into the operating room, and I was shaking. I mean, anesthesia sucks. I'm terrified. They did the countdown thing, and then the next thing I noticed was I couldn't swallow. What's going on? I can't swallow. Am I choking? No, they told me it was normal after the procedure I just had, and and then I was like, it happened already? And then a few minutes later, the sensation passed in my throat. And I was being wheeled out to my girlfriend in the waiting area. And I was high as a fucking kite on this anesthesia. Post-anesthesia, it feels like the best weed you've ever had. You're loopy. You're forgetting momentarily about the insane situation that I was in. They said it was going to be a few days until they knew the results and could tell me the lymphoma type. So I stayed at the hospital for the next day or so as I recovered from surgery, and I was in pain, and my neck felt exactly what you would expect it to feel like if someone had just cut into it. I still have the scar there. You can see it a little bit right there. Yeah. I went home with my girlfriend. My mother was staying at a friend of hers place in LA, and for the life of me, I couldn't tell you what happened during those days. Hodgkin's meant 90% survival rate if they call me and tell me I have that, and non-Hodgkin's meant 60% survival rate. So what would you do in this situation? I mean, come on. So, and then 5 days passed with nothing, right? And I remember I had negative thinking. I was like, it's taking so long. We all know what that means. Not Hodgkin's. I was in a terrible, terrible mental state. And then another 5 days passed, and I was starting to freak out. And then the call. I can't remember if I took it or someone else took it, and they said, drum roll, you have a type of lymphoma called mediastinal gray zone lymphoma. It's called gray zone because it's in the gray area of having some parts like Hodgkin's lymphoma and some parts like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he said the person said this, said it's very rare. And I was like, shit. And then looking it up online, I saw how rare it is. Only 300 to 500 people in the United States have it at any given point out of a population of what, like 350 million or something? Maybe a little more now. 500 out of 350 million people have this right now. That's how rare it is. I know. It's just like one thing after another. And it's called mediastinal gray zone lymphoma, or MGZL, as it's known for short, because it usually presents with large tumors in the mediastinum of the chest, as it had done with me. And unfortunately, it has one of the lowest treatment success rates at 55%. And it's just like, okay, this is the roller coaster we're fuck, more fear, terror. So then I met with my oncologist to perform something called a bone marrow biopsy. Now, throughout my entire ordeal, this was the most physically painful of all the things that had happened. So essentially what this procedure is, bone marrow biopsy, is they have to check to see if the cancer had spread to your bone marrow, right? Because that means it's, I guess, more advanced or something. So to do this, I'm not even making this up. They have to drill into your back near your spine, where they both stick a needle into your bone to suck out a bit of bone marrow. I'm sorry, this is very disturbing, but it's the truth. And maybe pause and skip it if you don't want to listen to this part. And then okay, so they get a little bit of the bone marrow, and then they stick another needle into your spine to like break off like a small solid sample of bone. Yeah. And you're not out for this. You're not general anesthesia for this. It's just shot Novocaine, like when you're getting with your teeth. So my oncologist, right, in LA, he was an odd one, right? And he didn't really seem like he knew what he was doing. So this is literally what happened. He took a large needle, like this big, not like a little sewing needle, like a big needle, and basically just stabbed my lower back for about 5 minutes, just like literally stabbing me in the lower. I'm not making this shit up. I swear to God, okay? So he seemed like frustrated, like he wasn't getting the results he wanted. So then he kept stabbing from different angles, like this. And when I say stabbed, right, that's what I meant. Like a sharp needle pushing as hard as he could into my lower back for 5 minutes straight. So when I screamed in pain, he made some gesture. Oh my God, what a fucker in retrospect. Like, everyone else can handle this except for you. And like, this is like, some gesture. And like, he said, he'd have to stop and reschedule, for later at the hospital where they could do it while I'm under general anesthesia. And it's like, oh God, dude, fuck. So then I talked to him about my Grey Zone lymphoma, and his answer was, he's never heard of that before. He thought I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, one of the ones I talked about earlier, right? He thought I had that. it was looking like it was going to be smart to get a second opinion, not to mention how expensive the treatment was going to be. What the fuck? Just did this thing again where I'm like, why do I have to explain this again to these people? What the fuck? I'm sorry, audience. Damn it. I don't have any hostile feelings to my audience. Like, what? What is this? I wouldn't have made this video in the first place if I had hostile feelings to people watching this. Why am I? It's just OCD. Look up OCD. Maybe I'll put a thing below OCD. OCD is your mind is against you. You have so many thoughts just to cause moral guilt. It's like you have thoughts like that just so now I feel guilty that I'm hurting my audience. Because obviously, if I didn't like people watching this, or I felt like I don't want to have to explain this again, like I would not make this in the first place. So I'm sorry. Look up OCD. It's a fucker. So anyway, going back to the thing again, and I have to tell you when I say this, because if I don't, then I just feel like I feel like I'm insulting my audience in my head, and then if I then ignore it, I just feel awful. Like I feel like I am. So that's why I have to tell you when I have this thought. I don't know where it is. I'm already in therapy. I'll probably talk about this with my shrink because it's just weird. And, I've probably lost a bunch of people because they think I actually am angry or have repressed anger towards, and I don't. But I just got to be honest, and if it repels too many people, then it's still better that I was honest. So, okay. But honestly, I could even see why you would want to turn it off if I was in your shoes and saying things like this. So anyway, no hard feelings whatsoever. But now, I'm going to go back to the story now. So, right, he said he's never heard of Grey Zone Lymphoma before, and he thought I had Hodgkin's. And I got to get a second opinion, and not to mention how expensive treatment was going to be. I'm thinking like fucking Walter White in Breaking Bad. Am I going to have to sell meth to pay for this treatment? Like, I'm an actor in Los Angeles, like, and I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger yet. So it's like, very bipolar industry. You're either poor or you're a fucking millionaire, So how am I going to pay for this? I'm a Los Angeles actor trying to get a big break, right? I'm relatively penniless now. I'm facing a coin flip to decide if I live or die. Just been diagnosed with one of the rarest cancers on the planet and was in need of like an expert doctor who even heard of this disease before. And I was looking at easily $200K of medical expenses in my near future. And I had to get treated soon if I wanted those 50-50-50 odds to stick. The cancer was in an advanced state. And my current oncologist seemed clueless. So I spoke to another one of my mother's friends who was a doctor who came up with the brilliant idea of contacting the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, which is the best way to look at it would be it's the government's hospital. So it's like the main hospital in America. It's like the White House of hospitals, right? So since my cancer, it was because she suggested this because since my cancer was so rare, they likely had a study on it. So I sent out an email to the head research doctor on the lymphoma team at the National Cancer Institute at the National Institute of Health. The National Cancer Institute is part of the National Institute of Health. And the next day he responded, "These are rare and can be difficult to treat. Highly recommend come to National Cancer Institute for treatment, as we are the only center in the world with experience. We are a research center and provide flights and all care if on our study, which is the standard of care." So everything would be paid for, the flight, the lodging, a food stipend, and nearly $200,000 worth of medical expenses for free. My buddy told me recently, he was like, dude, if you feel like you're unlucky, think about that. Think about how lucky you were to get that from this place, save $200,000. You're like the luckiest person ever. And dude, if you're watching this, you're right. You're absolutely right. Now, however, the catch was that I'd have to take flights from LA to DC every 3 weeks during my treatment, but financially, obviously, this is a no-brainer, right? I wouldn't have to, Walter White and pull a Walter White and start, selling meth. I looked up a treatment plan for my cancer, right? I found out that it was called EPOCH-R, and each of those letters, so EPOCHR, they refer to a different chemotherapy drug that I'd be getting throughout my treatment. So, replied to the email. A few days later, I was on a plane to DC, from there to Bethesda, Maryland. When I got to NIH, I was brought into a small room with the two main doctors, and there was like what seemed like maybe 10 other people in a very small room, and they're all like looking at me like, dude, like go. They're all. I'm looking around, and they're all just like this to me. They're all like that. Um, and yeah, so the most important thing I took home from that meeting was that I should start treatment immediately. And they continued to stress in a very tactful way that the cancer was very advanced. And in their most subtle, delicate, tactful way, the message they conveyed was very clear. You could die very soon if you do not start chemotherapy now. And again, picture someone implying this message to you in a small room full of 10 different strangers, and they're all looking at you with the same look of seriousness and impending doom. I mean, this was the moment throughout this all where I felt most in touch with my mortality. It was spooky. So I asked the crowd about going to LA first, back to LA, as I thought that had been the initial plan, was go back there first and then come back. But they said, no, that's not wise. They wanted me to start chemo the next day. And I told them I hadn't had the bone marrow biopsy, right? Because I said, it's too painful. And they told me that would be arranged as well. So I said, okay. And then, they described EPOCH-R that I said, and that is the chemotherapy treatment. And so the treatment for Grey Zone Lymphoma is chemotherapy, and only chemotherapy, no radiation or surgery, unless the off chance the chemotherapy didn't work. What they explained, however, was that EPOCH-R actually was one of the most intense and invasive chemo regimens that exist for all the other chemo regimens, for all the other types of cancer. And the reason that is because the treatment is only chemo and nothing else, no surgery, no radiation. So because it's only chemo, it's the most intense. Now, this is how it was going to work. They explained the logistics. So it's going to be 6 treatments, or as it's known to people who go through chemotherapy, cycles. And each cycle would last for 5 days. So I'd fly to Bethesda, get treated for 5 days, then fly back to LA for 3 weeks, then fly back to Bethesda for the next treatment, and this cycle would happen 6 times. So this is the way that I had the chemo. It's very different from most chemo regimens. If you talk to someone who, say, has breast cancer, they're going to say what I'm about to say right now, how their chemo regimen was. And most are like this, where you go into a hospital for 30 minutes to an hour session of chemotherapy, where through an IV or through some way you get the chemo drugs in you. Like I said, half an hour to an hour it takes, and then you go home. And then you repeat it in a little bit later. Now, this particular regimen that I'm on consisted of a time period where there would be a continuous infusion, what they call, which means continually the medicine would be going into you, of 3 of the chemo meds I'd be having in that EPOCH-R thing, through having a pouch that I'd carry around me for that time. So so day 1 of 5 would start with, I'll explain that if it's still, that was a little confusing. I'll get back to that in 1 second. So day 1 of 5 would start with me getting a catheter installed via my neck. If it seems gruesome, it's because it was. This would be a minor surgery itself, where I would get local anesthesia to numb the pain. The catheter would be the vessel through which the chemo meds would be delivered into my body. And after this, I would get an infusion of the first medicine, the R of the regimen, called rituximab. And this infusion, this is the one thing that would be like a standard chemo infusion that took 30 minutes. Now, day 2 of 5, I would get the pouch installed, and this is going to explain the thing I said earlier that I didn't really explain very well, was that with the pouch, it would deliver a continuous stream of 3 of the chemo meds, the E, etoposide, the O, vincristine or oncovan, and the H, doxorubicin or hydrodoxorubicin. So day 3 of 5, I would get the pouch replaced with a full one. Day 4 of 5, I would get that pouch replaced again with a full one. And And so these 3 days, I'm walking around, I'm doing whatever I want. I have a pouch. The medicines are going into me slowly over this time period. It was 3 to 5 days of this actually with them. And every day going in, and they would change the bag that had the chemotherapy meds in it. So that's very intense because the medicines are just constantly going into you as you're going about your daily life. It's not just going into a hospital and getting them in for half an hour or an hour. So the last day, right after this would happen, I would have the pouch removed and get one final med, the C, which stands for cyclophosphamide. And on top of all this, I'd be taking one of the chemo meds as a pill twice a day. The P, the prednisone. It's a steroid and it has terrible side effects I'm going to get to later. Also, I was on a gigantic dose of it. So after getting the last chemo drug of that cycle, I'd have the catheter removed, much less painful than having it installed, less invasive, a nurse could do it. And then also that day, I'd fly back to LA for 3 weeks until the next treatment. Now, there was one more thing. The chemotherapy, as a side effect, was going to get rid of my immune system almost entirely for a time period. And because of this, I'd have to give myself daily injections of a drug to replenish it. This drug I'd have to carry around with me back to LA in a mini cooler as it had to be kept cold at all times. During the 3 weeks I'd be back in LA, I'd also have to make sure I didn't get sick or a fever, as it would be emergency, as my immune system would be mostly depleted. It was like I was an AIDS patient temporarily with no immune system. So clearly, I then asked the doctors about the itching, because I'm still doing it at this time, and the head doctor assures me that it would likely go away after the first day of treatment, and I was in heaven. Finally, the solution to this madness. Now, the last thing the doctor group said, right before I went back to LA, was that because of this one particular kind of cell, mumbo-jumbo, science, Star Trek-ish kind of talk in my tumors, it was extremely likely that this treatment would work. And my chance of recovery, because it was this specific cell or something like that, my chance of recovery was considerably higher than the 55% I'd read earlier. However, again, they stressed the importance of, stay the course, right? You're going to get through it. You're going to go back to LA and chill out for 3 days and don't get sick. And that just try to feel better, because it's a lot higher than 55% if because of the cell and if you just follow all the rules, right? So this happened. I had the bone marrow biopsy that I talked about before at the National Institute of Health. It was to check if the cancer had gone into your bone marrow. And the doctor at the National Institute of Health was 1,000 times better at performing it than my LA oncologist. There was no stabbing, like I said before. It was very quick. It wasn't painless. As much as I am embarrassed to say, I cried out like a baby. Lots of pain with the anesthesia injection. Lots of pain when they took out the literal piece of bone marrow and then the actual piece of bone. But each of these things lasted only seconds, right? And I found out the next day the result, that it was negative. The cancer hadn't spread to my bone marrow. It wasn't the absolute worst case, but it was like one step back from that. Probably if that was the case, then I would have been dead already. I would have just died. So, and people ask me, they say, did you have stage 4 cancer or stage 3 cancer? And the truth of it is that because Grey Zone is so rare, it doesn't even have a stage 3 or stage 4. I mean, it is stage 4 because it was like the most possible, minus the bone marrow, but that's like 99% instead of 100. So I tell stage 4 because that's how you relate it to people. And if the 2 large tumors like taking out my whole chest, I mean, if that's not stage 4, what is? Your whole body is like a tumor? Okay, so right, so the first treatment week happened, right? The catheter hurt like a motherfucker. It was really painful. I got the first chemo drug, the rituximab, After the first day, the itching, it didn't go away like the head doctor said it would. However, I had a very strong feeling that something had been fixed, even after that first medicine. Next day, the pouch got switched. Meds were continually pumped into a catheter in my neck over the time that I said before. And about that P in the epoch R that I described earlier, the prednisone, this was a steroid pill that I would take twice a day. However, the amount that I took was gigantic. It was 200 milligrams of this little fucker a day. Now, halfway through the treatment, I looked online. I saw the average dose for my treatment plan was only 60 milligrams a day. So even with the epoch R, it's not 200. And this is an extra large prednisone dose, almost 400 milligrams, I think, total each day. And I actually asked the doctor, can I take less? And he was like, no, it's part of the study. And I did some research, and it's actually, this pill, the prednisone, was actually probably one of the most beneficial drugs to getting rid of the tumors. So it's like the one that saved my life the most. So you just have to deal with the side effects. And dude, oh my God. If you have any issues with anxiety or anything or anger or depression, this thing turns you into the Incredible fucking Hulk. You're yelling at everything. You'll hear a noise and you'll go, ah, fuck! And that's not an exaggeration, right? You go minorly insane when you take this drug, right? Your rage through the roof, getting mad at everything, arguing with my girlfriend, it's just irritating. Irritating. I asked the doctors partway through the study about lessening the dose. Like I said, I already said this, and they said they can't because it's essential. And for me, the prednisone was the hardest part of the actual week of treatment. For all the meds, it was really bad. It was the worst, except for how I felt after the first one. Because the catheter insertion into my neck was extremely painful, and the next times after I did that, they gave me Novocaine in my neck before they put that in. So that was the worst thing. But then the next cycles 2 through 6, when I already was getting the Novocaine, the worst thing definitely was the prednisone. Now, day 2 of the first treatment came and went. I got the pouch installed. I walked around Bethesda in Washington, D.C. with a concealed pouch of 3 intense chemo drugs running in a steady infusion through a catheter at my neck into my body. I walked into the National Air and Space Museum at D.C. The security check, they told me I had to remove my pouch. I told them that, unfortunately, I couldn't do this as the pouch was being used to... I can't even say it, to consistently pump chemotherapy meds into my body. And that was an interesting exchange, to say the least. So the next few days blurred together for the changes of the chemo pouch, and then it was day 5 of the first treatment week, and the pouch was being removed, and the final med, the cyclophosphamide, was infused into me. This drug, I've been told, was the one that could produce nausea. And after the infusion was done, they gave me some anti-nausea medicine to combat it and some anti-nausea pills to take home with me. Now, I remember too, this drug, it always, as soon as they put it in, it was weird. It just always gave me a runny nose, like right after it started going into me. Very weird. So, kind of one of those details that just sticks out. So, going back to LA after, this, I gave myself the first injection of that, that drug to help with your lower immune system in the airport bathroom. If anyone saw me with an injection needle going into the bathroom, I wonder what they thought. And unfortunately, the itching, it hadn't stopped. It had decreased very slightly, but not enough to the point where I could get a good night's sleep. Yeah, unfortunately. Now, the sweats had stopped. The coughing had mostly stopped. The nausea from the last medicine did happen, unfortunately, even with the meds. This ultimately, it resulted in some trips to the bathroom to dry heave, which sucks. But however, what I was dealing with the most was constipation. Extremely bad, painful constipation. They had told me that one of the drugs in my pouch, the oncovin, it could cause the constipation, but they hadn't told me how it could turn into one of the most intense and painful feelings of constipation I'd ever experienced. And they'd given me meds to deal with the nausea and the constipation, but the constipation was not going away. I hadn't pooped in like a week. And it got so bad that I actually found myself back at the Cedars-Sinai ER in Los Angeles moaning in agony because of my backed up, whatever. As, nothing worked to even slightly cause the glorious pooping to happen. No amount of any laxative, and I tried a bunch. Now, I don't recommend going to the hospital for constipation if you can avoid this, because what they do, they give you this medication to drink, right? But this medication is one of the foulest tasting things that you can you can taste and drink. And they make you drink a gallon of it. It's the same medicine they give people before a colonoscopy to completely empty out everything down there. That's like when they, stick this test where they stick something up your butt, So anyway, and again, I had to drink a gallon of this stuff. By the time I was 3/4 of the way through it, I was simultaneously projectile vomiting out of both ends. Now, but, the constipation had gloriously been fixed. So I knew I'd have to figure out a better way of pooping in the upcoming weeks after the upcoming cycles. And throwing all modesty aside, it was just going to have to be enemas. And every time I got back from Bethesda on the second or third day, I'd enema. And that was the only thing that ever worked. And very embarrassing, but I'm just saying it all. So I want to actually talk at this point about the drug that caused the constipation, the oncovin, right? Because I was thinking, I can't do it. It's oncovin or vincristine is what it's the vincristine is a word that a lot of people know, right? So vincristine, I wanted them to stop it. I said no constipation, but again, I looked this up online, and the thing about vincristine, it's actually very fascinating. It's like one of the first chemo drugs they ever invented. And it's a fucking miracle. I mean, it's literally the closest thing you will see you can not see on this planet, but it's the closest thing to like a miracle, that exists. This drug is even here, because what it does is it literally like a scalpel or like a tweezer. It goes into your body, and it only gets rid of cells that are dividing and multiplying fast, like cancer, and doesn't touch the cells that aren't multiplying fast. But then on top of that, this is where the side effects come from, because what other cells in your body besides cancer, grow rapidly? Your hair. That's why you lose your hair. The lining in your stomach. That's why you get nauseous. And that's the reason for these side effects also, because it doesn't it can't just kill cancer cells that are increasing rapidly. It kills all the cells in your body that are increasing rapidly. But it is a miracle. I mean, the fact that exists, it's a miracle. And again, without that, I would be dead today. Or if I had gotten this in the 50s before they even discovered it, I would be dead today. So, back to enema land, right? Okay, so I don't remember a lot from my weeks in Los Angeles. I remember I binge-watched a lot of TV. I rewatched Lost. My girlfriend was very kind and supportive. There were a few times where the stress of everything would get to us, and we'd have some minor altercation, but we got along pretty well, considering I was going through one of the most intense chemo things that exist. Now, I do remember after the second cycle, the itching at that point gloriously went away, and there was freedom, the sense that I'd done it, no more itching. I mean, Like, just remembering, it was one of the best things ever. Finally, after 7 months of just misery, I could sleep a full 8 hours at night. No more clawing at myself. No more electric shocks. No more driving around looking for a clean place to stay. No more thinking I had scabies and trying endless scabies treatment after treatment. Finally, that was over. Excuse me. Ugh. Oh my God. Yeah, I was just so happy. I was like, the rest of my life isn't going to be itching. Thank you. Thank you. You know? Now, the positive thing during the treatment weeks is that I could be a tourist in DC. I liked going to the Smithsonian. I liked walking around Georgetown, getting really good food. Overall, about those. Oh, by the way, Georgetown, the food that I got, Farmers, Founding Farmers is the restaurant, and it is off the hook. It is so good. Founding Farmers, if you're from DC, you know this place. It's so much good meat, fish, drinks. Chicken and waffles is actually their specialty, and they make amazing chicken. This place is the best. Whenever I go back there now, I always stop there. It's like the best food place ever. Restaurant. Food place? That's kind of weird. I don't know why I just said that. Anyway, so, yeah, so about the trips back to LA for 3 weeks to rest, I really don't remember much of that what happened. It's a possible side effect of chemo, like mild memory loss. After I'd gotten rid of the constipation, nothing really that bad happened. Everything went pretty smoothly. There were some episodes of intense nausea and like dry heaving after the second treatment week, but that was it. There were no really major bouts of vomiting, minus time at the hospital I told you about after drinking the gallon of that foul crap. It's actually called Go Lightly. It's not Go Lightly at all. It causes you to go. It's very misleading because you go very heavily. So during, honestly, I don't really remember. During the fourth treatment week, the chemo pouch pump stopped working in the middle of the night, and we were freaked out. But it turned out to be a big deal. I just had to stay an extra day to make up for it in that session or that week. But if you put yourself in my shoes, it's not working in the middle of the night. You're like, oh my God, right? But it was fine. Now, when this week was over, the fourth treatment week, they did a CT scan, and I received the most fantastic news I would get throughout all of this. I was in remission. And not only was I in remission, they were fairly certain that the cancer was completely dead at this point, and they told me that they couldn't say anything for certain because only a PET scan, which I wasn't scheduled until the final treatment, could determine this. But based on the CT scan, they were very, very confident that the cancer already was gone. And it's just like, celebration, joy, success, I did it, it was over. Inner joy and jubilation and inexpressibly large feelings of relief and the joy of all humanity and existence, and I killed the cancer. And the question even came up, did I need the final 2 treatments? And they assured me that even though the cancer was likely gone, the point of the chemotherapy was also to make sure that it would never come back. So the final treatments had to happen to keep the cancer from returning in the future. Now, I don't remember clearly until after the 6th and final treatment week, because after that, I almost died again. While my immune system was totally depleted, which is called being neutropenic, I got an infection, and I had to go to the ER again, because if you get an infection with no immune system, it's bad news. So my white blood cell count was almost entirely depleted. My red blood cell count also was almost entirely depleted. The doctor came in, and this very tactful kind of way of talking again, he said that if I didn't have a blood transfusion ASAP, I was going to die. So I remember walking to the bathroom before the transfusion and almost just passing out. It was crazy. And the way this whole thing ended then was by them pumping a lot of someone else's blood into me. And after this happened and my immune system had been completely restored, I went home. And 3 weeks later, I went back to Bethesda for my final PET and CT scans. My tumor had completely shrunk into a non-cancerous mass of scar tissue. The cancer, and that happens to everyone, the cancer was 100% gone. I was in remission. Joy. Over the next months, I would go to my LA oncologist to get my blood tested, as I've been doing. I'd actually been doing that throughout the treatment weeks when I was home with the LA oncologist. And every few months, I would go back to Bethesda for CT scans, and just to make sure it doesn't come back. And during these trips for scans, I would get what's known in the cancer community as scan-anxiety, feelings of nervousness at this time, they'll see that the cancer is coming back. But the cancer wasn't coming back. It was completely gone. And these scan trips went from happening every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, and finally every year after the 2-year remission mark, which it's supposed to stay at for the rest of my life. And it stayed gone for 4.5 years. And they've assured me that the chances of coming back after being gone so long is next to nothing. And that's that. So 4.5 years later, here I am now. I wish I could be making this video under a, with a feeling of it still is gone, it's still completely gone, and I'm just living life because I survived cancer. But if you've read my social media, you'll know I'm not doing very well health-wise, unfortunately, right now. And like I said, that's why I wanted to make this video now, because unfortunately, if I were to get diagnosed with something else or some kind of other cancer now, I would probably be very hard to stay emotionally connected to this first incident, this first experience. So it's unfortunate. It's one of three things. I either have lymphoma coming back, or some other cancer. That's like the first thing. The second thing is because I'm getting weird numbness sensations and parts of my body falling asleep, like pins and needles, really bad. So it could be a neurological condition. And the third thing it could be is I've had anxiety for a lot of my life, and I've had anxiety that causes some physical symptoms, but just because of probably just anxiety from COVID and the world and Donald Trump there's a good chance that my anxiety has just increased to 1 billion times. Most people are anxious, obviously, because of what's happening. But if you already have issues with anxiety, like I did, and then this happens, it could make sense. This would create like an anxiety problem unlike anything I'd ever experienced, so strong that it actually can create night sweats, or it can create feelings of my body falling asleep. And I think it is somewhat likely that it is just like the worst anxiety problem ever, which I will know if I get cleared from the neurological test and from my tests at my oncologist. And at that point, I'll know it's anxiety. And the plan, actually, I have a psychiatrist. The plan at that point would be actually I was gonna voluntarily commit myself to an institution for a little bit. They do treat you like kind of like you're nothing there. It is a little bit like the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you've ever seen that, the orderlies do kind of look down to you. It's pretty degrading, but it's just something I'm gonna have to do, because when I go there, the psychiatrist there is awesome. He's the best ever, and he can just immediately switch your meds to this one, this one. Take off the meds that aren't working, and you feel better almost instantly. So that's the third thing that I'm going to do if the cancer is totally gone. That test, neurological, no brain problem, that's gone. If it's nothing, then it has to be anxiety. And I've had so many tests going to the ER, for this whole time that if it's not one of those two things, it's almost 100% anxiety. Which again, as a man, is something that is pretty embarrassing to talk about, but I think it's more embarrassing to lie. Be open, be honest, live your life. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And even if this is the cancer coming back or some neurological problem, I'm not afraid. I've been down the worst path, and I'm surviving. And every second on this planet, to all of us, is sacred. You got to take advantage of every second. So, worst comes to worst, it is some awful thing. Nothing I can do about it. I'm still going to enjoy every moment that I have here. Every moment. And that's that. If you watch the whole thing, I feel like I should give you a sticker or something, you know. But thank you for watching it if you did. I was just joking about that sticker. I really am very appreciative. And if you only watch part of it, I hope the part that you watched, you learned a little something. And that's that. So, bye-bye. Take care. Stay safe.